The karma of a narcissist does not begin on the day they lose you. It does not start when they are exposed, betrayed, or when a relationship collapses in front of everyone. Their karma begins later, quieter, and far more ruthless at the moment you stop participating. Not when you stop loving, not when you stop being angry, but when you stop carrying them inside your inner world. Because for a narcissist, existence is not anchored in conscience, nor stabilized by a mature ego. It is sustained by the psychological presence of other people. As long as you are there, you are not only a lover, a partner, or a victim. You are the place they borrow in order to stay upright against their own emptiness. According to Carl Jung, a human being can live fully only when persona and shadow are held in at least a minimal balance. But the narcissist is not like that. They do not face the shadow. They place it on the shoulders of others. And for a long time, you have unconsciously carried what they did not have the courage to look at. You called manipulation love. You called control attachment. You called your exhaustion sacrifice. And in doing so, you delayed what was inevitable, the moment they would be forced to face themselves. So when you leave, what happens is not an ordinary loss. It is the collapse of a structure built on borrowing. Karma does not arrive as punishment from the outside. It does not require the universe to intervene. It does not require you to do anything more. Karma is simply the withdrawal of the one who kept the illusion able to continue. When the mirror is removed, the mask has nothing to cling to. And when the mask begins to crack, the shadow, the very thing they have avoided all their life, returns to the subject. This is why a narcissist cannot escape their karma, not because they are cursed, but because their karma is the truth they have always avoided. And this is also why you play a bigger role than you ever thought. Not because you take revenge, not because you are stronger than them, but because when you choose yourself, you stop being a shelter for the false. And then what remains is not a loud collapse, but a process of disintegration that no one can rescue. Part 1. Karma begins when you stop carrying them. There is a common misunderstanding that keeps many people trapped in pain longer than necessary. They believe a narcissist's karma will come through an external event, a clear punishment, a public downfall, or an instant, what goes around comes around moment. But through the lens of depth psychology, karma does not operate as an event. It operates as a process, the withdrawal of what has been shielding them. And that process begins at the exact moment you stop carrying the inner burden they should have been forced to face themselves. In a relationship with a narcissist, you do not only give affection, you give psychological function. You hold an experience of stability they cannot generate on their own. You soothe their inner chaos through your presence, through listening, through explaining for them, feeling for them, even taking responsibility for what they cause. Over time, this makes you believe you are loving, trying, sacrificing. But at a deeper level, you are unconsciously becoming a regulatory organ for a structure that cannot stand by itself. As long as you are there, karma cannot reach them, not because they are innocent, but because you are standing between them and the inner consequences of who they are. You help them not feel the emptiness. You help them not look directly at their shadow. You help them maintain a persona convincing enough to keep living in the illusion that they are fine, that they are right, that they are superior. And every time you ask, why don't they change? The answer is here. Because they have never had to face themselves. Karma truly activates when you withdraw from that role. No anger required, no declarations, no victory. Only the fact that you no longer participate in the system. For a narcissist, this is not a normal breakup. This is the moment they lose the psychological foothold they have relied on for far too long. And because that structure is built on borrowing, when the borrowed source disappears, It does not collapse instantly. It begins to rot from the inside. What matters most to understand is this: you are not doing anything to them. You are not triggering karma through action. You trigger karma through energy withdrawal. When you stop calling chaos passion, stop calling control care, stop calling exhaustion love, you are returning to them the very thing they have always avoided: themselves. And that is where karma has always been waiting. So if you have ever wondered why, after you leave, everything in their life starts to look distorted, more chaotic, more repetitive, and increasingly empty, the answer is not external punishment. The answer is that no one is carrying what they never had the courage to carry. Karma does not need you to prove anything. It only needs you to step aside. Part 2. The moment they realize you have truly disappeared. The moment a narcissist realizes their power is gone does not come with thunder. There is no dramatic climax, and it does not happen in front of other people. It comes very late. It comes in silence, and it comes in a way they cannot deny. It is when they realize you did not just leave, you are no longer there psychologically. At first, they do not believe it. In their world, people do not truly disappear. People go silent to get attention. People withdraw so they can be pulled back, so they wait. They wait for a reaction, a message, a sign of jealousy, a moment you lose control, anything that proves they still have influence. But nothing happens, and it is precisely that nothing that begins to crack the structure. At this point, a very strange feeling appears in them, not sadness, not longing, but a nameless unease, a discomforting void, as if a power line that used to supply energy has been pulled out, yet they do not understand why the lights have gone off. They begin to check, rereading old messages, fishing through other people, posting more, performing more, not to live, but to see whether you are still watching. And when they still get no response, that unease turns into a smoldering panic. This is the moment when power truly begins to collapse. Because for a narcissist, power does not lie in whether you stay or leave. Power lies in this: whether they still occupy space in your mind. And when they begin to sense that you no longer revolve around them, no longer waiting, no longer reacting, no longer needing them to understand, a primal fear rises. If I am no longer being reflected, then who am I? It's wand. From Carl Jung's perspective, this is when the persona begins to lose its nourishment. The mask that once depended on an audience suddenly becomes heavy and exposed. And the shadow, the denied part, the emptiness, the shame starts knocking from within. But the narcissist does not know how to face it. They have never learned how to be alone with themselves. So instead of stopping, they escalate. They become louder. They create new stories, new relationships, a new version of I'm better than ever. But behind those images lies a bitter truth. There is no one there who believes as deeply as you once did. No one carries them. No one regulates their emotions for them. And the more they perform, the emptier they feel. The more they try to prove, the more exhausted they become, because they are trying to hold together an ego that no longer has a foundation. The moment they truly realize their power is gone often arrives in very ordinary circumstances. A quiet evening, a moment with no witnesses, when they suddenly think of you and realize that you are no longer there to be affected, no longer there to be hurt, no longer there to be pulled back, no longer there to be manipulated. This does not make them remorseful. It terrifies them, because for the first time they are facing an irreversible truth. You have exited their system. From that moment on, everything they do is no longer an expression of power, but a reflex of lost power. Smear campaigns, character attacks, narrative control, indirect manipulation, all of it is a desperate attempt to deny what has already happened. But deep down, they know. They know that what mattered most is gone. Not you, but access to you. And that is the point of no return in the narcissist's karma, part 3. Why the replacement can never fill that void. After the moment they realize you have truly disappeared, the narcissist's next reflex is almost always the same: finding a replacement, not out of love, not out of healing, but because they need to immediately fill the expanding emptiness inside. For them, silence is not a space for reflection, it is a threat. And the new supply becomes a temporary bandage to cover a wound they are afraid to look at directly. On the surface, everything seems fine. They appear next to someone new. They tell a new story. They wear an image of happiness and confidence as if you never existed. But at a deeper level, there is a very cold truth. The replacement is not chosen for who they are, but because they can play your role in the old system. And no one can play that role for long, because it was never the role of an ordinary person. It was a psychological function. You did not only listen, you understood them at depths they could not access on their own. You regulated their emotions, carried their inner conflicts, and kept their self-image from collapsing. The new supply cannot do this, not because they are inferior, but because no one can carry an empty structure indefinitely. And when that unconscious expectation is not met, the narcissist becomes disappointed, irritated, and then contemptuous of the very person they just chose. From a Jungian perspective, the problem is not the object, it is the absence of a stable self. The narcissist does not seek connection, they seek reflection, and reflection inevitably fades when the other person begins to have boundaries, their own emotions, their own needs. When the new supply starts to show up as a real human being, tired, doubtful, questioning, they immediately become a threat rather than a solution. This is when the void returns, deeper than before. Because now it is not only inner emptiness, it is silent comparison. Not a comparison between two people, but between two states. The state when you were there, and the state when you are not. And no matter how much they deny it, their body and psyche remember there was a time when things felt easier, more stable, less chaotic. What hurts them is not losing you, it is losing the function you once fulfilled. That is why they replace people quickly. They jump from one relationship to another. Not because they have many options, but because no option is sufficient. Each new supply lasts only a short time before being drained, devalued, and discarded. And every cycle does not make them stronger, it makes them more depleted. Because with each failed replacement, a part of them is forced to face the truth they hate most. The problem is not other people. That void is not the absence of a relationship. It is the absence of an ego that was never built. And no new supply can fill what should have been formed from within. You once did it not because you were meant to carry it, but because you loved and did not yet know how to stop. When you withdrew, you took with you the only capacity that allowed them to temporarily avoid themselves. From that point on, every replacement is merely a late attempt to recreate what cannot be recreated. Part 4. Why they can have someone new and still be drawn back to you. There is a paradox that leaves many people confused and doubting themselves. The narcissist has someone new, has built a new story, yet still quietly watches you, talks about you, reacts to your existence as if you never left. This is not leftover love. It is not because they haven't let go. It is a sign of a structural psychological distortion that no new relationship can fix. The new person exists to fill the immediate gap. You exist within them as an inner anchor that once held their entire system together. These two roles are not the same. And because they are not the same, even with someone new, you cannot be replaced psychologically. They may share a life with another person, but the deep reflective power, the thing that once soothed their chaos, was bound to you over a long period. When you withdrew, that void did not disappear. It was only temporarily covered. The new person brings novelty, but novelty has no depth. It does not know their dark corners. It cannot carry the contradictions you once carried. It does not have enough time to become a psychological refuge. As a result, the new relationship must be heavily idealized to compensate for what is missing. The more it is idealized, the more they have to perform. And the more they perform, the more exhausted they become. In that state, memories of you do not appear as longing, they appear as unconscious comparison. Through the lens of Carl Jung, this is the consequence of not having a stable self. The narcissist cannot maintain a coherent image of themselves when the object changes. Each relationship becomes a new stage, a new role. But you are the one who witnessed them when they were least able to perform, when they were tired, when they collapsed, when they were chaotic. And because of that, your existence is bound to a truth they cannot tolerate, yet cannot erase. This is why they move forward while constantly looking back. Not because they want to return, but because they need you somewhere within their field of awareness so the old system does not collapse completely. They're monitoring, probing, mentioning you, whether negatively or positively, is a desperate attempt to keep you in the role of a reference point. As long as you still exist in their mind as an object that can be affected, they have not completely lost control. But what hurts them most is not that you exist, it is that you exist without being affected. When they realize you do not react to the new story, are not triggered by the new relationship, no longer compete, no longer compare, a deeply uncomfortable feeling rises. If I cannot make the person who once mattered most react, then who am I doing all this for? And that question has no comforting answer. So they are stretched between two poles. On one side, the new person, where they try to rebuild an image. On the other, you, where they once felt the most power. This tension creates obsession. Not obsession born of love, but of lost access. And the more they try to prove that they are fine, the more they are pulled back toward the place that once kept them fine, even as they hate admitting it. The most important thing you need to understand is this: that pull does not last forever. It weakens in direct proportion to your non-participation. Each time you do not react, do not look, do not explain, do not appear in their narrative, the invisible thread thins. Not because they let go, but because the system has nothing left to cling to. And eventually, what remains is not longing, but total emptiness, the place they must face alone. Part 5. The moment they truly collapse internally. That moment is usually very quiet. No one witnesses it. There is no audience. It may come on an evening after the phone screen goes dark, when the new person is no longer new enough, when praise no longer warms them. A moment when they suddenly realize that although people may still be around, there is no longer anyone there to carry emotions for them. No one to regulate, soothe, or reflect them back into a state of okay, the way you once did. And for the first time, they must be alone with themselves. At this point, they are no longer angry in the familiar way. Rage drains away, revealing something far more frightening, an unfillable emptiness. Not sadness with an object, not pain over a loss, but the feeling that there is nothing inside to hold on to. From a Jungian perspective, this is the moment when the shadow can no longer be projected outward. There is no one left to blame, no one left to carry it for them, no familiar mirror to show them a version of "I'm fine." What makes this moment so brutal is that they have no inner tools to process it. A psychologically healthy person can slow down, reflect, grieve, and then reorganize themselves. A narcissist cannot. When the persona cracks, what is revealed is not a self waiting to be healed, but a void that was never built. And because they cannot remain with that void, they begin to spin in panic. You may see the consequences of this stage in increasingly poor decisions, more rushed relationships, more extreme choices, more contradictory words. Not because they are becoming worse, but because they are losing orientation. Everything that once helped them locate themselves, power, attention, your reactions, is gone. And when a person no longer knows who they are, they either face it to be reborn or cling to chaos to avoid feeling the emptiness. The paradox is this: At the very moment they collapse most deeply inside, they may look their best on the outside. The smile is tighter, the image more perfect. But this is the sign of a system burning its last reserves to sustain an illusion. Because inside they know that what once kept them standing is gone. And they also know that you will not return to save that system. This collapse does not take the form of remorse. It takes the form of prolonged disorientation, a recurring sense that no matter what they do or achieve, they never reach a feeling of enough. And that is the deepest karma, not punishment, but having to live with the very emptiness they spent a lifetime avoiding. When you withdraw completely, no reaction, no presence in their narrative, this moment becomes irreversible. If you have ever asked, when do they truly collapse? This is the answer. Not when you were in the most pain, but when you have found peace. Not when they lost you, but when they lost the role you once played in their inner world. From that point on, no replacement is strong enough to return them to the old state. Part 6. Why your peace is the final blow. Your peace is not a victory. It is not loud. It does not need an audience. And precisely because of that, it is what a narcissist cannot endure. Not because you are living better than they are, but because your peace exists completely outside their control. This is the final stage of karma, when there is nothing left to compete for, nothing left to argue against, nothing left to manipulate. Throughout the relationship, the narcissist's power was fed by your reactions, your pain, your hope, the unanswered questions, the times you tried to understand, fix, and wait. As long as you wavered, they had a role. As long as you were hurt, they had influence. But when you reach peace, all of those supports disappear at once, not gradually, but simultaneously. What makes your peace the final blow is that it gives them no position. You do not oppose them, so they cannot fight. You do not need their understanding, so they cannot explain. You are no longer in pain, so they cannot hurt you. This peace is not indifference, it is the state in which you no longer need them to participate in your inner life. And for a narcissist, that is equivalent to being removed from the system. From a Jungian perspective, this is the point at which psychological energy has fully returned to the self. Their persona has no place to be reflected. The shadow has no one to carry it. And you, the one who once played a central role in stabilizing them, are no longer there to do anything at all. No rescuing, no judging, no confronting, only complete absence. It is this peaceful absence that cannot be undone. They may smear you, rewrite the story, construct a new image, but all of that rests on a hidden assumption that you still care. When you truly no longer care, not as an act, but deep within the entire structure collapses, because there is no longer anyone on the other end of the rope. There is a very subtle moment when the narcissist senses this, when they realize that no matter what they do, you no longer waver, not because you are stronger than they are, but because you have left the game. And in a power game, the one who leaves the board does not lose, they end the game. This is why your peace is the final blow, not because it hurts them the most, but because it gives them no opportunity to cause hurt, no conflict to exploit, no emotion to drain, no role to occupy. Karma requires no further action. It is complete the moment you return to yourself. From that point on, the story is no longer about them. It is about you, a person who has reclaimed ownership of their inner life. No need to prove anything, no need to win or lose. Only the steady silence of someone who has passed through the darkness and does not carry it forward. Part 7. When karma is complete, the loop they are trapped in. When karma is complete, there is no moment of celebration, no dramatic collapse. No one steps forward to declare that the sentence has been carried out. A narcissist's karma does not end with an event, it ends with a closed loop, a structure they cannot escape, because it is created from who they are, not from external circumstances. That loop begins with emptiness. Not emptiness because they lost you, but because there is no longer anyone holding their sense of worth in place. From that emptiness, they reach for stimulation. A new person, a new role, a new story, new power. For a brief moment, everything lights up again. They perform again. They believe once more that they are fine. But that light never lasts, because it never touches the root. And when the effect fades, they fall back into the original emptiness, deeper, colder. Through the lens of Carl Jung, this is the loop of a persona with no self to support it. Each time the persona is rebuilt, it requires a greater amount of reflection to remain standing. But because the shadow has never been integrated, every structure is temporary. They are forced to run faster, perform more, control more harshly, not to live well, but to avoid stopping. The next loop is search, withdraw, discard. They seek a new person with the unconscious hope that this time will be different, that this time will be enough. But the moment the other begins to show limits, set boundaries, or stop reflecting perfectly, contempt appears. They withdraw energy. They devalue. They leave or are left. And then the loop begins again, faster, more exhausting, more hollow. What makes this loop a completed karma is this. There is no longer an exit through awareness. Before, when you were still there, a possibility, however fragile, existed that they could be held, stabilized, saved from themselves. When you withdraw completely, that possibility disappears. There is no one close enough to carry it for them, no one deep enough to reflect the real parts. And so each repetition carries no hope of repair, only more evidence of the dead end. The final loop, and the heaviest one, is self-persuasion. They begin retelling their own story, not to convince others, but to convince themselves that everything is fine, that they were right, that you were the problem, that what was lost did not matter. But the more they repeat that story, the emptier it feels. Because deep down, they know if the story were true enough, they would not need to tell it so often. This is where karma closes the loop, not because they are punished, but because they are trapped inside their own mechanism of avoidance. There is no climax, no clear ending, only an inner life circling between emptiness, stimulation, disappointment, and denial. And that circle continues not because you are still there, but because you are no longer there. Meanwhile, on the other side of that loop, you have left the orbit. You are no longer part of the cycle, no longer pulled into search, withdraw, discard, no longer required to prove anything or wait for change. Your karma is an ending. Their karma is repetition. And that difference, quiet, undramatic, is the deepest outcome that no new relationship can reverse. At this point, the most important thing must be placed back in its proper position. This story was never about how the narcissist is punished. It is about where karma stops. And karma does not stop with them. Karma stops with you. When you were still there, you stood between them and their own inner consequences. You cared for them, regulated for them, kept an empty structure functioning. When you withdrew, you did not push them down. You stepped out of karma's path. From that moment on, everything unfolded according to its nature without requiring any further action from you. From a Jungian perspective, this is where the process of individuation truly completes. Psychological energy is no longer trapped in an external object. It returns to the center of the self. No more trying to fix, no more trying to understand, no more trying to save. Only the full presence of a person who has reclaimed ownership of their inner life. The narcissist continues their loop not because you abandoned them, but because they never built a place to return to within themselves. You are different. You leave the loop. You do not carry the shadow with you. You do not need to win. You do not need them to collapse to prove anything. Your quiet, stable life is already the final answer. And perhaps this is the deepest truth of karma. It is not loud, not judgmental, not in need of witnesses. It operates with ruthless precision. Those who can carry inner responsibility become free. Those who avoid it repeat. You were never their lesson. You are the ending point of a cycle you no longer belong to. From here on, the story no longer continues in the old direction, not because everything has been resolved, but because you have left the place where you once had to resolve things for someone else. And that is not escape, it is a return.